Priest and a rabbi, best friends, going out to lunch. And the priest is biting into his ham and cheese sandwich, saying to the rabbi, you know, those kosher laws, they're just archaic. I mean, back then they were probably useful, but today, with refrigeration and everything else, they're just not useful anymore. When are you going to start enjoying this healthy, good food? Rabbi says, at your wedding. Mother's Day got me thinking about feminine power. And I thought about my mom. My mom became a single mom through divorce at a time when that wasn't done so often. In fact, it was frowned upon, being a single mom. Now, when she first got divorced, she didn't know she was going to be a single mom. She thought she was falling into the arms of this other man who then died. Suddenly, just as we were moving into our new place. And so she was left with raising 3 kids, the eldest of which being a very big problem. Tough to handle. And having to, because my dad was not the best at handing over money, having to go out, work, take care of 3 kids, and make all that somehow work in a life that was very hard at the time, with everybody frowning down upon her for doing so. Then there's my wife. Single mom a really long time before I show up, raising 2 very young girls, moves into a condo before the market crashes. Then the market crashes, the condo goes underwater, and to make sure she understands underwater, it then floods. But she somehow rose above that, as my mother did, to raise 2 brilliant children. And my mom, she did a good job. My brother, he's on 42 different patents, one of which was the very first machine to make computer chips. My sister, she coaches executive teams from some of the largest Fortune 500 companies in the world. They call her in to coach their executive teams. And I didn't turn out so bad. I'm with you guys. Ash's 2 children, they're brilliant. One's into robotics and Chinese. The other is just one that was part of a championship team in lacrosse. Doing a great job. Laura, one of our congregants, a single mom, making tough decisions about becoming a single mom and doing a brilliant job, as her son is amazing and runs our internet sound. And so these were tough decisions. Tough women standing up in their feminine power. Then there are the women who actually stayed with their husbands, which, from what I can tell, is no easier, because it's like taking on another child who's much bigger, and I'm sure my wife will attest to that. And then there's these surrogate moms, like Ginny, who is a godmother, loving her godchildren as if they were her own. And Mother Teresa, who helped thousands, nurtured thousands of children in Calcutta to great lives. And so I was just thinking about all this feminine power, and it got me going on, where did this all begin? And I thought back to that very first birth. Right? I'm not talking about the Adam and Eve birth. I'm talking about, these cavemen and women who all of a sudden, the consciousness in apes somehow shifts. We have humanity, which has a questioning mind in a way that no creature before has ever had on this planet. And a live being comes out of this woman. It must have freaked the guy out. And then he looks down, he's going, nothing's coming out of me. This is where life-giving birth is happening. There must be something special here. And unfortunately, men throughout the ages have had this extraordinary habit of, once they experience the awe and wonder of something, either want to own it or destroy it. And so they decided to make women property, because they realized that destroying women would have a negative effect on their own survival. And throughout the ages, they came up with all these incredibly good reasons to hold women down, to make sure that men were in charge. Now, for one thing, men were physically stronger, but then they wanted to make sure they had all the reasons to back it up. And so all the ancient texts were written in a way to prove that men were better than women, right? We got the I Ching, written in China by a guy named Confucius. And they developed this book with all these hexagrams that have deep meaning. One of them, and so the first hexagram, the very first hexagram in the book is called Qian, and it's the masculine. It stands for primal power, light-giving, active, strong, and of the spirit. This hexagram is consistently strong in character, and since it is without weakness, its essence is power or energy. It is the image of heaven. Now we jump to Kun, the feminine. This hexagram represents the dark, yielding, receptive, primal power of the yin. The attribute of the hexagram is devotion. Now, men, they don't have to be devoted. They just get to be creative. But it's written right into the I Ching that women are supposed to be, that a symbol of feminine power is actually devotion to men, the masculine. That was written in over 4,000 years ago. By a man. Exactly my point. Okay. Jesus comes along, and he actually is all about feminine power, because his first disciple was Mary Magdalene. And in fact, there is a gospel called the Gospel of Philip, which is not in the Bible, and I'll get to that in a minute, which states that Peter goes to Jesus and says, I noticed that, you're giving all this extra attention to Mary. You kiss her on the mouth and you take her into your room in private. How come you don't do that with us? Specifically me, Peter's saying. And Jesus just looks at him and goes, what? You're asking me why I kiss Mary on the mouth and take her into the room in private? That gospel didn't make it into the Bible. In fact, there are 3 gospels. Here's an interesting, you know how I love history. In the first 300 years after Christ died, there were 50 different Bibles. And so what happened was a bunch of guys got together in the year 367 and said, we need to, get one Bible instead of having all these separate ones. And they decided that the Gospel of Mary, Thomas, and Philip, all these Gospels of which point to Mary being the number one honcho and the number one disciple of Christ, tossed them, took them out, and then rewrote some of the passages to make her sound like a prostitute. Which, these other Gospels, if you get a chance to read them, and you can now because they've been found, these original Gospels actually exist either as the Dead Sea Scrolls or in the Nag Hammadi Library. You can actually read these Gospels in their original writings. Well, you probably need them translated, since you probably don't read the original. That talk about all this stuff that is not in our Bible, that talks about the power of women. So here's all these men doing everything they can to keep women down, through violence, through writings. We're talking thousands of years. And then we get to slavery in America. And it's really interesting about slavery to me when I look at this through the eyes of feminine power, because it turns out that black women are doing way better in standing up and fighting their way in life post-slavery than the men. And that's because women have fought. There were a lot of women who didn't really actually feel the difference. They were in slavery before they got here. There's all this romantic writing about how well they were treated in Africa, but when you actually look at the evidence and the they were treated in Africa the same way they were treated any place else, which was badly by their men. That was going on everywhere. So they get over here, and they're subjugated in this whole new way, and they were the ones that were really strong through slavery because they had it built into them. There is a forbearance in women that has been built up through the ages that men don't have, because men, wherever they came from, are always in charge, except when they got conquered. And then, they whined about it. Slavery was abolished in 1865, and black men got the vote. Women didn't get the vote till 1920. Finally, getting a chance to voice themselves without being knocked across the head. Not that still didn't happen and still doesn't happen today. But with each passing generation, we continue to pass laws that allow women to stand up more, because we need that. There is a forbearance in women that men need. Because when we don't have our freedom and we don't have our way as men, most of us whine. And women don't. Because they have it built in them how to contain, how to rise, how to do what needs doing when it needs doing in a way that men have just not had to deal with in the same way. Does that mean that men don't stand up and men don't have power and men can't do their thing? No, I'm not saying that at all. But there is something that has been built into women because they have been oppressed for so long that is different than any man can carry. And that is the beauty of feminine power. That is the beauty of what stands up. Turn on the house lights, please. So women come forward and start exercising power in the 1920s. Get the right to vote. It still takes, what, almost 100 years before women have the Me Too movement, where they're saying it's no longer okay to sexually abuse us. It still takes 100 years, but you know why women can hang in there and be strong about that? Because they've dealt with thousands. They're not impatient the way men are. They have a sense of timing that is unbelievable. You women have a sense of timing that blows my mind, that I listen to every single time my wife talks about it. She doesn't even know I listen sometimes, but I'm listening. Because timing, the sense of forbearance, the sense of what it takes to raise up. The other thing is there, because of all this time passing, there is something in our society that says that men are the creative and women are the receptive. And it actually isn't true. Because to give birth is a creative act. It's not a receptive act. If you've ever watched a woman push, that is not a receptive act. But me, I'm sitting there when my son is born, receptive, watching him fall into my hands. Those early hunters had to be receptive to what was going on out in the world. So this thing got turned around because somehow creative sounded more powerful, and of course men wanted to take on that. Now, here's another thing about all this, the feminine nature in men, okay? There was a time in history where that was more acceptable than even being a woman, which is why in ancient Greece they had men play the female roles instead of women, because they didn't want to give women even that amount of power. So they gave it to the feminine men. There was a time feminine men were considered the healers, the shamans, the people of great power, because somehow they had embodied the male and the feminine together. It wasn't until the Middle Ages that gay became something wrong. Sure, it's in the Bible. It says that, in terms of the Jewish history. But Jews were a really small amount of the population, and most of the population didn't care about that. And the Christians didn't take that on early on because they thought this was a good way to keep women down by, allowing feminine men to stand up and be the healers, be the priests, be whatever. So that whole thing that changed, that's so bizarre in the world today around making somehow gay being wrong, didn't actually happen until a relatively short time ago compared to, the history of mankind. That men used to be much happier with feminine men than they were with women. And so again, we're in a place now where that's all changing, where people were holding down the idea of gay, and now all of a sudden, gay pride. It's the same thing as Black Lives Matter, right? And we have the sacred feminine, again, taking charge of their own femininity. There's a whole community out there called Evolving Wisdom that my wife is one of the leaders of that has like 100,000 women in 72 countries standing up throughout the world to say feminine power is important in the world, and we don't have to be men to do it. We don't have to be any different than holding our place of creativity in the world. And so all these people who have been ostracized are finally getting their opportunity to stand up and be respected and admired and have their place in society in a way that makes us all better. I mean, that's the thing about all this, okay? It doesn't matter it does matter that women have been oppressed that long, but what I want to say about it is it's only added to their power. You women are sitting here today, you have a tremendous gift in what you can give now, because now is all we got. I've given you the history so you know how we got here. But if we're going to be responsible for the power we have, it starts right here and right now. It starts in our ability to rise up. The more we allow that feminine energy, that incredible forbearance that they have on society to show up, the way we lead changes. The way men lead changes. The more we allow the feminine in men to come out for those men who have that and want to bring that to society, the more we become diverse, the more we see different ways of perspective, and the more we get to rise together. Each one of our differences feeds us. Each one of our differences has a power that we don't have. Every time we are looking at somebody who's different from us, they have a power that we don't have, as we have a power that they don't have. And so when we work together, we have just exponentially increased our power as a people. And that's the thing I want to celebrate today. You know, last week I talked about how the first breath, everybody knows to be sacred. And if the first breath is sacred, every breath is sacred. And if every breath is sacred, then what we do with that breath is sacred. What we do with our breaths, what we do with our time and energy, is as sacred as we are willing to bring to that time. There is nothing mundane. Life is a gift. And it's a gift that is brought by women. So today I celebrate women. I want you to know that my admiration and my love and my caring for the heart, for the nurturing, for the creativity that arises out of women is something that is changing our planet as we are standing here speaking. It is something extraordinary. It is something amazing. And it is something for us all to embrace together. Thank you. Take out what you're going to give and hold it in your hand. This is not just money. This is God. This is energy. This is how we create the law of circulation. The more we give, the more we receive. This is how we get things moving. So let's get things moving. Do unwrinkle it. Do not crumple it up. Hold it in your hand and say this affirmation together. God is the source of all supply. Money is God in action. What we give, we receive, multiplied abundantly. All that God is, I am, and so it is.